Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Um, this class, we are going to be covering a couple of different things, and we're going to be continuing and building upon what we went over last week. So the first thing that we're going to discuss in class today is the concept or the continued concept of 3D space. And so I've prepared a few visual aids to help explain my point to you guys, as the concept of 3D space can be somewhat tricky. Here we are. Okay, so 3D space. So every object in your scene, or every object in 3D space has a position. There's a coordinate position, and it works very much like a grid, just like there is here. But just in 3 dimensions. But for my example, I'm only going to show you 2 dimensions. That way, it's a little bit more easier to understand, and you know, these same concepts apply when you add another axis to the equation. Okay, so yes, so let's say, for example, this is our 3D space. As small as it is, this is our 3D space. So it's about 6 units wide, counting 3 in positive and x, 3 in negative x, 3 in positive y, and 3 in negative y. And that was actually one of the concepts that I wanted to explain a little bit further later. You know, with the 3 axes that we move in, x, y, and z, there's a positive and a negative value to it. And where those positive and negatives start depend on a certain thing that I'm actually going to cover here. Hello. I am just in the middle of the lecture, so I'm actually just going to pick up from right here. I'm not that far into it quite yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep going. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask that we save the questions till after the meeting is over. And so I'm just going to uncheck the mute buttons for now, and then I'll allow you guys to unmute yourselves after we're done. Cool. Okay. So I was talking about the concept of 3D space, and everything in 3D space has positional, rotational, and scale coordinates, right? And so in the example that I have here, this is our 3D space, this box being about 6 units wide and 6 units high. And that's based off of our origin. The origin is where all of these axes meet, y, x, and z. But in our case, it's just x and y. So our origin being right here at 0, and counting 3 this way is positive x and positive x1, positive x2, positive x3. Going this way is negative x1, negative x2, negative x3. And, you know, positive y going this way and negative y going this way. Again, all based off of this origin. And so if this is our world space, we're going to keep going. And so let's say we plop a blue ball into our 3D space, into our 3D scene. And so this ball contains the coordinates of x at 0, z in 0, and y in 0. Hello. I was just continuing on in the lecture about 3D space. I'm going to ask that we save questions and unmuting ourselves until after the class, just because I'd like to keep this chunk of the recording as intact as possible. And then I'll allow you guys to unmute yourselves afterwards, and you guys can ask me anything you want. Okay, so yes, we have our 3D ball, or we have our blue ball, and at the moment, it is in world space, meaning that it does not belong to any other space. It doesn't belong to a parent group. It doesn't belong to a null node or anything like that. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But it's just placed in the world and on its own. And so these are its coordinates in the world space. So once we group this ball, what we're essentially doing is, 1, we're creating a null node above the ball that we can manipulate, but 2, we're also almost giving it another set of 3D coordinates. And so along those lines, this ball group also has positional coordinates just like the ball does, based off of the world, because the ball belongs to the group and then the group belongs to the world. And so these coordinates are of the ball group. And then let's keep going a little bit. So if we move our ball, as we did here, the ball group now has coordinates of x1 and y1. That is the ball group. And then the in world space, it has the coordinates of x1 and y1 as well. But you'll notice that when we move the ball group, the actual ball group, right? You know, the ball coordinates in world space will be x2 and y2, but inside the ball group, it'll be x1 and y1 because it's still relative to the group. So these coordinates back here are of the ball inside the group. And these origins line up at the moment because the ball group has not moved. And so once we move the ball group, the origin from where the ball space is, where the x and the y meet, has moved. And so at that point, the coordinates become a little bit different. So I'm gonna go through these next slides, and this will clarify a little bit what I'm trying to talk about. So here I've taken out the grid for the world, and I'm just showing the ball group, right? So if our origin is here for the ball group, giving our another set of coordinates, the ball group origin is here. The ball still has coordinates of x1 and y1. But in the world space, you can see that this grid, this space will never move. The world space will never move. And so in world space, its coordinates are x2 and y2. And we'll get to that image later. But let me explain this a little bit further in an actual 3D scene. That way it'll be a little bit more clear. This is just the concept of it. So let's start with creating a ball, just like we did in our last class. And then I'm going to zero out its translations just by selecting all these in the channel box and zeroing them out. So going over all those concepts again, remember there's 3 axes of movement. And if this is our grid right here, this is the origin of the world. This is where all of our axes meet. And so when the ball is created, and since it is not a parent of, it's not a child of anything, let's open up the outliner, we can see that there's nothing above it. It's not nested in anything. It just belongs to the world. And so these coordinates that we're moving along, this is its own space, but it's also the world space because it does not belong to anything at the moment. So its position is 0, 0, 0 in world space, right? And so if we were to put it in a group, let's say the shortcut for actually grouping is Control-G. And you see item group successfully. So if you hit Control-G with an object selected, it'll create a group. And so you'll see now that the group has a set of coordinates, but the ball also has a set of coordinates. So this is what I was talking about. If we move the group, just like we did in our example of x1 and y1, its position in world space, because it does not belong to anything, its position in world space is 1 and 1. Now if we select our ball, you'll notice that its channels and its location and its coordinates are still at 0. And that's because the actual ball didn't move, but the group above it moved. So let's see what happens when we take the ball out. I'm just going to middle mouse drag outside, and you'll notice now that the group is no longer a parent of the ball. So now if I select the ball, now it has the coordinates of 1 and 1. It inherited these coordinates from where the group was, since it was taken out from where it was moved. And let's take that a step further. Let's go ahead and put it back into the group. I'm going to middle mouse drag and put that back into the group. And let's make this a little bit more obvious by cranking up these numbers. So let's say 8 and 8, right? It's all the way here. And now, by selecting the sphere, and just the sphere alone, these coordinates are still at 0. Because in relation to its parent, the group above it, it has not moved at all. But the group itself is the one that's moved. And so if we take this and put it back into world space, you'll notice that it's at 8 and 8 now because it's a parent, it's a child of the world. Understanding this concept is going to really, really make things easier for you once you begin animating and moving things through space. Like, understanding this concept is huge and it cannot be understated. The more familiar you get with this concept, the easier animating is going to be. You'll be able to compartmentalize and kind of separate things and keep things organized. That way you can make changes efficiently, and you'll be able to almost speed up your workflow in a sense, because if there's something that you're looking for in your animation, you know where it's coming from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these. Actually, you know what? Let's just keep this for our next example. So I'm going to zero these out again. And now, so like I was saying, each object, everything in 3D space has coordinates. And so when we were typing in the numbers here in 1 and 1 and 1, these numbers stand for units, pretty much the units of measurement. And so there are different units of measurement that Maya normally abides by. I think its default is centimeters. I don't remember off the top of my head. But if you'll notice, let's go to a front view. Let's go to wireframe, and each one of these boxes is 1 unit of measurement. So that'd be 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And you can change this unit of measurement in your preferences. So the preferences are, remember, in Windows and settings and preferences, or you can go down here with this little dude that's running with the gear. And then you go into your settings. Oops, wrong one. And right here, you'll see that there's a title for, or an area for working units, and you can set which working unit you want to use. The units that you use are really going to depend on the project that you're working on. Let's say that you're doing previs for a film, and they have a set built, and you need to give them a realistic representation of how far the camera is off the ground, how far the subject is from the camera, and which way and on what path the camera needs to move while on set. And so, it's not uncommon to have virtual sets built to scale, and having a camera very practical to everything that you would find on the set. That way, all of the figuring out, of where to put the camera, where they're going to be finding their shots, their practical shots when they're doing previs, that can be all figured out virtually, without having to spend all the resources of actually going on set and spending all that time and money and figuring all that stuff out. They have the advantage of figuring it out here. So that's in one instance where you would want to change the units of measurement. Another instance might be when you are working for some game engines work in a different unit of measurement that's different from native Maya units of measurement. And like I said, it's going to depend on the project. Okay, so moving right along, we are going to go now to moving in different spaces. And so when we learned a little bit about the different spaces that objects can be in, right? They're in their own object space, but they're also in world space because this ball is a child of the world. but also, you know, there's a parent space as well. If this ball is a child of this parent, then the parent space for this ball would technically be this group right here. So in order to get to those different spaces that you want to move things in, you can hold either one of these shortcuts for manipulating the objects, which is translate, W for translate, E for rotate, R for scale. You hold that down and you hold right click. I'm sorry, you hold the W down. Let's say we're going to do it for movement. We press W or hold W and hold left click, and then you can let go of W if you like. But you'll see all these different spaces that you can move the object in. You can move it in the object space. You can move it in the world space. And there are a bunch of different options for you to be able to like tick. Since these are all tick boxes, these are all essentially channels in the attribute editor that you're accessing from the hotbox. So say, for example, that I am, this ball is rotated up this way, and it's angled that way. So if I want to move this ball completely horizontal, I'd ideally want to move it, instead of having to move it this way and this way, I can move it in world space. And since, like I said, the world space will never change. It's always going to stay in the same orientation. That orientation is already set up for you here, just as a point of reference. Y is up, X is this way, and Z is this way. And so, like I was saying earlier, if you can assume that X is this way, this is positive X, and this is negative X. And the same can be said for the other channels. If this is positive Y, this is negative Y. If this is positive Z, this is negative Z. And so, if I want to go back into the orientation or move the object back into the orientation that it's naturally in, I'll press W, hold down left click, and I'll go back to my object space, and I can move it in the object space. And now the same can be said for rotates too. You get a whole different set of options for rotates. You can rotate it in its object space, in the world space, in gimbal, which we'll talk about later. That's really important to understand as well. And so I'll show you an example, just like I did with the translates. If I want to rotate it to the right, towards my right, towards like the exact right, and not necessarily having to rotate down in Z and down in X, right? I can go to my world and rotate it this way, because these coordinates and this orientation for world will never change. And same for scale. You'll get a whole different options of scaling as well. Although when animating, you're not really going to be dealing with the scale too much unless it's some kind of squashable or stretchable mesh for really cartoony stuff, or maybe like scaling the rig. But normally there's a special channel for scaling the rig. Okay, and so next I want to go over a little bit of different ways of moving and getting things a little bit more precise. So obviously, aside from using the manips, but when I say manips, I mean manipulators, and aside from using these, you can type whatever value you want into the channel box, as I've been doing and as you've seen me do, right? Or you can use these up here in the toolbar. You can use absolute transform and relative transform. So you'll see here, there's a box for each of the channels X, Y, and Z. And right here, if you left click, you can choose either absolute transform or relative transform. These are the only two options in this menu that have to do with actual coordinates. And so what absolute transform does is, if you'll notice, let's say I pull my ball all the way out here and it's at 13.483. If I type 5 in the X box, since I'm on, you can see that I have my move tool activated. If I hit 5 in the X channel box, it'll put my value, or it'll put my box to 5 units at X. Whereas If I use relative transform and I type 5, it'll stack on top of what's already there. It's a great way of kind of measurably moving your things or measurably moving your controls in case you really, really want to animate that way. You know, it's completely up to you. And another thing that's pretty helpful when you're either building like your own custom sets or maybe there's something that you want to snap it to, that's exactly what it's called. You'll notice over here up in the toolbar, you'll see a bunch of these magnets. And so what these magnets are it's exactly that. It'll allow you to snap these objects to either the grid. Let's mouse over this one. Okay, let's try that again. This one will snap it to the grid. This one will snap it to curves, to points, to a projected center, to view planes, and this one helps the, this one allows you to make another object live. I won't go over a lot of these since you won't be using a lot of this, but I'll go over some just so that you guys get an idea. So if you want to snap it to the grid, you can just turn on the grid snaps and you'll notice that your the center of the manipulator changes to a circle. So, and you can see now that when I'm dragging it around, it'll snap to the nearest unit of measurement, or you know, the nearest unit on the grid. If you try and snap it to a curve, you're going to want to, actually I'm going to create a curve just for the sake of this example real quick. There we go. Let's say if we want to snap it to a curve, it should normally do that, but maybe it's to a point. Let's see. Oops, sorry. Okay. Maybe not that one. Sorry. I never use that one. I've never found a use for that one, really. Snapping to points is a little bit ahead of what we're going to talk about. I'll revisit snapping to points in a little bit and actually making an object live. This one actually is pretty useful. So say, for example, we select this, and then we select this magnet. You'll notice that right here, it'll give us the name of the object that we had selected when we hit this magnet. That means whatever object is in here is live, meaning that if we want to snap this to it, we can. It'll give us the coordinates of the surface. So I'm going to turn wireframe on shaded here. And you can see that it's going to try and snap to any surface around the sphere. Let's see if it's a little bit more clear in wireframe. Even if I try and drag way far off the sphere, you know, it won't. This one I've actually found a use for. Okay, cool. So that was a little bit about the snaps. Actually, on the note of kind of bringing two objects together, the next thing I wanted to go over is the align tool. And so aligning two objects, there are a few ways of doing it actually. There are a number of tools that you can use to align objects. This can come pretty handy when, let's say, your character is holding a weapon and you want to align the hands to the weapon, and you know, so you can pose the hands and grip them without having to, like, you know, kind of go into all the viewports and make sure that it's aligned from all angles. You can just align it. So the way I would recommend that actually is there is an align tool using modify, and you'll see there's a drop down section for align. There's the align tool here, and you can snap align objects. So there's different ways to align them. You can go point to point, 2 points to 2 points, 3 points to 3 points, and like I said, These points are the same points that they're talking about here up in the snaps. We'll go over that in a later class, after we've actually gone over like the sub-object mode of everything and stuff. But this is probably the most common tool that's going to be used in align objects. So what we're going to do is let's go into the option box. And what's going to happen is all of these options are different ways of how you would align the objects. But the one that you're most likely going to want to use is this mid. What mid's going to do is it's going to align the middle point of the objects. And most of the time, the middle point being the center point. So, and most of the time, that'll get you pretty close to where you want to be, and then you can move from there to get it exactly where you want. And so down here, you can see that there are a couple of options. You can either align in all three, or you can align in just whatever axes that you want. And then the selection method actually is as follows. Since last selected object is what we chose, we're going to select this first, and our last selected object is what everything is going to align to. So since we can tell that the green was the last one we selected, if we hit apply, the white one is going to jump to the coordinates of where the green one is. You can see that they're overlapping. There's another method of doing it. It's a little bit more old school. I suggest not using this method if you are trying to align two controls together, because what this is going to require is that you take it out of its hierarchy, meaning like you take it out of its like parent or something like that. And that's not really a good practice for when you're working with characters. But when you're working with objects just like this that you aren't going to animate, what you can do is if you actually make this sphere a parent of this sphere, so I'm just going to middle mouse drag and put it under sphere 2. If I drag it onto this sphere 2, you can see that I can select this, and it's a child of its parent being this. And so if I zero out this, if I zero out these channels, it'll snap back to its origin. Its origin is its parent. And now I can unparent that, and I can do with them what I will. But you'll notice that this is along the same lines of the principle that I was talking about in 3D space, where I'm going to unparent this first. You'll see that it's at 0, 0, 0 right now. It's at the origin of the world because it doesn't belong to any parent. Once it belongs to this parent, it's already given these coordinates. So in relation to this sphere is negative 9.891 units away from it. So meaning I can zero that out, and it would snap to wherever this is. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the sample scene group parent boxes. So first, I'm going to make sure my project is set by setting project. And I have all of my examples in here called examples project. I'll go file open. And in my samples folder, I have a scene called group parent boxes. Okay, so now I want to go over a little bit more the concept of grouping and parenting. And so I know it can be a little bit difficult to understand at first, but hopefully with this little guide and like these boxes that I've set up, it'll be a little bit more clear. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about grouping and parenting. So there is the well, first, okay, cool. I have my outliner up already. That way you guys can see pretty clearly. So what you can do, there's regular grouping, meaning you can group these together just by selecting them and hitting Control G. And actually, let's see, is it in Edit? Yes, Edit, Hierarchy, Group. Or you can do it in the outliner as I was doing, just by if you want to parent one thing to another, you can do it like I was doing with middle mouse dragging. And so you can see that there's this group above it. This is all contained in the same group. and they're all still independent of themselves, right? That's the idea of grouping, but the idea of parenting is different, right? Because in parenting, you can see that there's an actual hierarchy, right? So if I move the green box, it'll move on its own. If I move the blue box, it'll move the blue box and the green box because the green is a child of the blue. If I move the red box, everything will move because the green and the blue, or the blue is a child of the red and the green is a child of the blue. And so this is a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of working in different spaces too. So technically, all of these objects share the same parent space, which is this group, right? Whereas these, they all have different parent spaces because they're nested underneath different parents. You know, it's really important to note that, only because a lot of the rigs that you guys will be working with, meaning the characters, a lot of characters you'll be working with, there'll be a lot of different controls, and there'll probably be multiple controls for the same thing, and that's essentially what these are. They're just different groups and different nodes in order for you to control the same thing. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, so on that note, I'd like to go over the idea of null nodes. So that's exactly what I was talking about, where I was saying that, you know, a lot of the characters that you guys will be interacting with have a lot of different controls for the same thing. And that's because it'll give you options as to how you'd like to organize your animation. Maybe on one of the controls, you only want to animate the translations, or on another control, you'd only want to animate the rotations. That way you can keep them separate from each other, because you know, your translations will change. I'm sorry, your rotations will change based off of your translation sometimes. And so, you know, having separate nodes, null nodes, above each of these objects or the controls that you guys are going to be using can be really, really helpful. In order to create a null node, you can basically just hit Control G with nothing selected, and you'll see that it creates a default node right here called null1. Null meaning, you know, an empty node, or an empty set of coordinates, right? And so if you can nest a bunch of them within each other, and let's say if you want to use a ball, a super small one for some reason. Let's try that again. There we go. If we nest that into here, we can move the ball, you know, using all these different nodes, since this is the only thing nested in the tree, right? There's no other objects in here. There's just other null nodes. You can use this here, or a great way to use this for, or a great way to utilize null nodes is if you need to, let's say you're animating a book and you need to turn the page, right? You would probably want to turn the page from somewhere in the middle of the book, but you want to be able to control like the tip of the page using this controller. You know, a lot of those concepts you'll begin to see once you start working with characters. Okay, so now I want to move on and go on to another sample scene called Geometry and Curves. So I'm just going to hit Control O, and we'll open Geometry and Curves. Cool. All right. So there's a bunch of different kind of stuff here. Cool. So I want to go over now the different modes of how would I say this? The different I guess selection modes. Yeah, the different selection modes. Right now, and by default, we're in object mode. So once we click something, right, we'll get the menu set, and we'll get to interact with the actual object node of it. But if we were in the sub-object mode, let's say for example, this, and I'm going to right click, and you'll see there's a bunch of different options. These are options for getting into the sub-object mode, meaning the things that make up the object. That's the only thing that I mean when I say sub-object. You know, the components that make up the object. And so if I go to vertices, you can see that they're made up of all these little points, and I can select the points. Or if I go to face, you can see that I can select all of the faces, meaning these the points at which the geometry at which is formed based off of the vertices, or the edges, right? The bridge where two vertices connect. This isn't necessarily useful for using character controls or anything, and most of the time when you're working on a production, you're going to want to stay away from working in this mode. But if you are, let's say, creating like personal shots or something like that, you know, you'll definitely need to go into the sub-object mode in order to edit models or anything like that. And so along those lines, a normal mesh, or you know, a normal piece of geometry, if it's made of polygons, are made up of you know, vertices, edges, and faces. Those three sub-object components that I just showed you: vertices, edges, and faces. But the last thing that I think might be really useful for you guys are actually something called UVs. And so I wanted to go over the concept of UVs and unwrapping. And what UVs are, sorry, I lost my place. What UVs are basically a different set of coordinates that exist on top of the model in order to wrap textures around your models accurately. So I'll go ahead and show you. So if I go to UV, I can select the individual UVs, but you'll notice that if I try and move it, I won't get any kind of a manipulator. Only because UVs work in a two-dimensional space, not a three-dimensional space, U and V. And so I have more visual aids as to how UVs actually work. But before that, I'm going to go and show you this grid that I was telling you about of U and V. So if you go to Window, let's select this lightsaber right here. So if you go to Window, Modeling Editors, and UV Editor, you'll see here that we have our lightsaber. And this is how textures are mapped onto 3D objects, right? If I go into my sub-object mode, meaning my component mode, I'll select the face, and you can see that my selection will update in the UV texture editor. This is how, like, so normally when you wrap or create textures around an object, you would export something like this and maybe bring it into Photoshop, you know, lay them along the UVs accordingly. That way, you know, when you bring them into Maya and you wrap it around your object, you know, they wrap the way and they fit the way you would expect them to. And then, so let's go over the concept of UVs. And oddly enough, very funnily enough also, I have not found a better way to describe UVs other than, wait for it, other than this guy. So hopefully you guys have all seen these. These are the chocolates that you can find around Christmas time. And so I have not found a better way to describe unwrapping and UVs and texturing other than this. This is the best way that I've found to describe it. So here we have Santa Claus chocolate, right? And it's wrapped in this foil with Santa Claus on it. So you can think of 3D models in the same way. The chocolate Santa Claus that's inside is our 3D mesh. And the foil that's around it is the texture. And so I'm gonna keep going. Here's our 3D model, and here's our 3D model textured, right? And so when we unwrap, this is literally the literal term that's used in the 3D program. What you do, or what they call the process of laying out the UVs for a model, is called unwrapping. And so when you unwrap the UVs of a 3D model, you lay them out intuitively. That way, you know, when you're in Photoshop or wherever you're creating your texture, you know, they would make sense to you when you begin to create them. They look something like this. They're flat like this, just like I was showing you in the UV texture editor. And so that when this texture wraps back onto your 3D model, it knows exactly where it's supposed to wrap itself around, and the features line up just like it does on this little Santa Claus. And yeah, you know, that's the best way I found to explain it, funnily enough. And here's a practical example. We're going to use Steve from Minecraft. You know, the simplest of the simple 3D characters, nothing but boxes. And so this is what he looks like. This is what his 3D model looks like. He's just a bunch of boxes. Chamfered edges, sure, but you know, he's essentially just boxes. And so his UV layout looks like this. His T page, meaning his texture page, looks like this. So you can see that this square right here is the front of his face right here, because when we see it applied to the texture, it's right there. And as you would assume, the sides of his face are right next to his face like this. There's his ear and there's his hair. And you can tell that from his face, right, the UVs are laid out in a way that you can paint the face this way and it would wrap correctly. So that's UV and unwrapping and you know, texture mapping in a nutshell. And it's just something I want you guys to be able to understand. So when you do any personal work, or when you do any you know, when you're on a production and you find that, you know, something may be off in the texturing or anything like that when you're working with your models, you know, it'll be easier for you to spot why. And it'll also be easier for you to check where the problem might be. Whether you fix that yourself or not may depend on where you're working. Maybe that's someone else's job, but at least you'll be able to communicate to them where the error lies, right? Okay, and so let's say for our lightsaber real quick, let's turn on textured mode. And here we have a lightsaber with the textures on. And just like I was showing you earlier, you can actually see the texture in the UV editor here. There are those lined up right there. And I'm going to go into face. You can see the face is lined up right there. You can see that it's lined up on the other side as well. And it's laid out in a intuitive way. So that is UVs and texturing and, you know, unwrapping. Okay, so you saw me go over this a little bit earlier, but these little, you know, wireframe things that you can actually interact with are curves. But more importantly, these are what your controls are going to look like when you start working with a rig. They're called curves because, you know, that's basically their creation method, and like that's what these components are called. These are polygons and these are curves. And so the way you create these is a lot similar to the way you create geometry. You can use the shelf right here, or you can use the create curves right here. You know, and you would create it a lot the same way. So you guys saw me make us a circle earlier. It's a lot in the same way where you would drag up from the grid. I don't know how much of these you guys will be creating yourselves when you start working with rigs. Most of the time you'll get them from somewhere else, or if you're learning how to create one, you know, from scratch, yeah, there's a lot of actually components that make up curves as well. So like I was going into the sub-object mode with polygons, having edges, vertices, and faces. The same can be said for these curves. You right-click, and they're made up of vertices. The hull is a term to kind of encapsulate the entire curve itself, and points. And so when you're working on a rig, one of the things that you can do is let's say you're working with a control and it's way too difficult for you to select because it's way too small. But you're not allowed to scale up the control, because what might happen is if you scale up the control, it might scale up that certain part of the character, let's say the shoulder, right? If this box were the controller for my shoulder, if I scaled it up, it might balloon up my shoulder. And you just want to scale the curve so it's a little bit easier to select when you're working. So that's where the hull would come in handy. If this might not work because it's a closed curve. Let's try this one. No. Uh-oh. Did I use the wrong curves? Maybe. Let's try one of these. There it is. Okay. So you can see that there's a bounding box around the entire curve. I'm going to select my curve and go to hull. You can see there's a bounding, well, I'll say a bounding box, but you know, there's a bounding box around the entire curve that you can select. And then from here, you can scale it up and it won't affect anything underneath. So let's say if the rig is supposed to be controlling this ball, I'll duplicate this ball. I'll put it under this NURB circle, and then I will zero out the transformations. And then, you know, just for this example's sake, I'll move it into place. Okay, so let's say this is the control that's supposed to be for this ball, but it's way too difficult to select, right? And so what you can do is you can select the control, you go to the hull, and if you scale this up, it won't affect the ball at all, even though the ball is a child of this control. Most of the time, if you do that to a rig or a character that you're working with, it's pretty non-destructive and it's pretty harmless. But yeah, that's a great tip for working with a character with a lot of controls, or maybe with controls that might be just too small for your preference. Okay. So actually, you know what? Let me bring this back. That might help. Okay. So let's say that you are working with this character. Let's call this our character. And you know, you keep accidentally selecting the ball instead of the actual controller. You don't want to move the ball. You want to be able to move the controller, right? And so up here, you'll see in the toolbar right next to the snaps, this is the selection filter. And each of these represent a kind of 3D object. And so if we turn off, let's say these, and let's turn off everything except this. This is the little icon for curves. So now, if we want to select geometry, we can't, even if we wanted to. So now, if this is the character that you're working with, you can just leave that as the only thing on. You can draw a bounding box around it, and you know that you'll be selecting the NURBS curve, and you won't be selecting the ball. The opposite can be said too. If you select or deselect, the curves and select the polygons, you'll only get the polygon and not the curve. When I'm working and when I'm animating, I definitely have this selected only. That's the only thing I want to be concerned with, and I want to be like, you know, touching. Not unless there's something else in my scene that I absolutely have to interact with. Okay, it should be noted that if you want, I'm gonna reset this real quick. I'm gonna frame my selection around this guy. If you want, if you go into your sub-object mode, there is a section for that too. And so let's see if I can get to it without. This one. Yeah, here we go, components. So you'll notice that I'm in, this selection filter is for my component mode. I wouldn't necessarily use this all the time, only because when you're in component mode already, you know, that selection filter is kind of done for you. But in case for some reason you want to select multiple components or change between components quicker without using the right click, you can do so here. These buttons here show you the different selection modes that you're in. So right now I'm in component mode, sub-object mode. If you go to this one, this is the default one in object mode. Cool. Okay. So now I'm going to go into some of the windows that you guys are going to be using a lot when you guys are animating. So I'm actually going to open up the file. I'm going to ask that you open up the file that we saved in the last class, or maybe 2 classes before, I can't remember, called ball, box, ground. Cool. And so I have my ball, my box, and my ground. Okay, cool. So the first thing I want to go a little bit more in depth into is the timeline and the time slider, being this timeline / time slider. So aside from the obvious, you can see that, you know, my time slider starts at 1, it ends at 24. If you want to extend this, you totally can. You can either, or you can type the designated frame range you want in either one of these boxes. But you'll notice what happens if I change them in one as opposed to the other. So if I change it in the second box, my current timeline will stay at 24 only because that's what I want to be showing. But you'll see my range slider here that if I select this box right here, I can stretch it out all the way to 200 if I wanted to. And likewise, I could crush, or I could, you know, I could adjust my beginning time, my end time, more towards 200 if I wanted to. You know, a lot of the time when you're doing your animation, you're going to be working on it in sections. And so, you know, being able to control what keys you view at a time will really help you manage your workload and kind of help you stay focused on what you should be working on. So these 2 boxes on the inside represent what you're seeing in your timeline. And these 2 boxes on the outside represent how many frames there are in total. And I want to go over some of the right-click options that you have when you go into the timeline. All of these have to do with manipulating keyframes, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I think the most important ones that you guys are probably going to want to learn about is sound, especially when you start animating dialogue and like lip sync stuff, or maybe to music, and play blasting. So what play blasting is it's basically making a recording of your you know, of your animation or what you have in your 3D scene. It's making a movie file of it, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. So along the range slider, right here, this toolbar right here, we have our in frames and our out frames, sure, but also I want to go over this anim layers. So you'll find the anim layers actually here in another tab right next to the display layers. And the concept of animating on anim layers we'll go over more, but you can see from this drop down here which anim layer that you're on. So let's say that you have a few anim layers. You have the base animation layer, anim layer 1, and anim layer 2. If you're setting keyframes on, you know, on the base animation layer, it'll show that no anim layer is selected, but you can change which one you want to just from this drop down. And this is a great way of showing you quickly if you're on the wrong animation layer. Let's say you want to be setting keyframes on the base animation layer, but you accidentally have this selected. You know, it's important to keep an eye on this, especially if you have more than one layer in your scene. Okay, and so if we continue down the range slider to the right, it'll show us our frames per second. If we want our playback to be on continuous loop or not, or play once, or oscillate, is that oscillate? I can't remember the term that it bounces back and forth. Anyway, sorry. This little button is auto key. So what this does is it's going to automatically set a keyframe for you after you've set your first keyframe every time you move your object. And I'll show you guys a quick example of that. So if I just want 1 to 10, let's say I set a keyframe on this guy. I'm going to select my channels and hit key selected. Or if you want to select all of the keys, you just select the object and you hit S. Let's say I have my 1 keyframe set already, and you can see that it's represented here with a red tick in my timeline. If I move anywhere in the timeline past that, or even before that, I move it, and it automatically creates another key for me. You definitely want this on, for sure. Whereas the alternative would be to leave this off, move it, and then set a key. Key selected, right? Whereas if, let's say I didn't, let's say on frame 8, I want my ball over here. If I move up, it's going to snap back to the position where it was last keyed. And that can be very frustrating sometimes, especially if you're working with an entire character. You get to frame 10 and you pose him exactly the way you want, and then you move your time slider off and he goes straight back to this. No fun. Okay. So let's keep going. And obviously you guys have your settings and preferences, as I've showed you multiple times. Okay, so the second window that you guys are going to be constantly using, I'll delete these keys for now. Constantly using is if we go to Windows, Animation Editors, you guys are going to be constantly using the graph editor. So I'll explain the concept behind the graph editor a little bit. First, let's go over some navigation around it. So you would navigate inside the window a lot similar to the way you would in the viewport in Maya. You interact with the objects by just using left click and right click. But you interact with the viewport by using shortcuts using Alt right click, Alt middle click, and since we're only working in a 2D view, Alt click, right click, and then I think there's Alt Shift middle click, which will stretch it. Alt right click will zoom in and out, and then Alt middle click will pan around. Okay, and so you're going to see a couple of different things over here. These are all shortcuts. And I remember the things that I said about shortcuts, or buttons, sorry. The things that I said about, or the thing that I said about buttons before still rings true to this window. Whenever there's a button for something, more often than not, it's a very commonly used tool or function or something. More often than not, whenever there's a button for it, it can also be found in the drop-down menus up here. And this is still very much the case for all of these up here. Everything you find here, you can still find here if you want to. This is more just for ease of use. And so in this left pane, I'm going to set a key on my ball just so that we have a little bit of information to work with. So let me drag this out to the side. On frame 1, he'll be here. And then on frame 10, he'll be over here. And since I have auto key on, he's moving on his own. I don't have to set another key. And so if we look back into our graph editor, we can see that there are these noodly things here. These are called curves. Excuse me. My goodness, excuse me. Sorry. In our left pane here, it'll show you which object we have selected. There's the name right there. And it'll show you all of the channels that have been animated. So you'll notice if we go through each one of these, there are a noodle or a curve for each of these, right? And whereas if we select that, all of these are stacked together. And it'll represent it being selected either by turning white, or it'll show you that there's a little box right next to the name that shows you that's what you have selected at the moment. Okay, so inside the So let me make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Inside the editor, the graph editor, these little diamonds right here and these ones over here, these are the representations for keyframes. And so if you decide to move them up and down or left and right, by moving them up and down, sorry, there you go. By moving them up and down, you're changing the value. And you'll see that the value is denoted right here on the left. The higher you move something, the more positive in value. The lower you move something, the more negative in value. And which way that moves in actual 3D space really depends on the object. So that'll change sometimes. You have to pay attention to that. And by moving it left and right, you're moving it in time. So the graph works as such: up and down, the vertical value is the amount, meaning the value that you have in your channel box, and the horizontal value is time. You can see the frames that you're on up here. This yellow bar right here is the playhead for the time slider, the range slider, or wherever you want to hit play from. And so let's go through a little bit more into keyframes. So if I have this keyframe selected, like I said, you can change the value or you can change the time just by dragging left and right. I middle mouse, by the way, I'm middle mouse moving this around. But if you right click, you get a few different options too. And so, you can insert a key. You can isolate a curve, meaning if you're seeing all of these, if you select this and isolate a curve, you'll be only seeing that curve. And then there are a few other options as far as tangents goes, and I'll break down the idea behind tangents a little bit after this. And so let's say if you want to insert a key, you keep going along your playhead and then you select your curve and you can select insert key. It'll put a keyframe exactly where it is, where the playhead is meeting this curve. And from here you can adjust it as you will. And so the relation between these keys is represented in this curve, hence the name curve editor or graph editor. Okay, so I'm going to go over the drop-down menus a little bit. So in Edit, you'll get all the same options that you would normally see in any other program: copy, paste, delete, so on and so forth. And you'll get option boxes for all of these as well. We'll go over these a little bit more later when we start getting into the tools of manipulating keys. And there's View. You'll get the same options here as you would when you're working in a viewport or a camera. You can undo the view change, redo the view change, so on and so forth. Select, meaning everything that you're working with inside the UI or inside the window. If you want to select just keys, just curves, just the tangents, it's really up to you. Just like our selection filter up here at the top. There's curves. This one is a pretty robust menu that you probably want to use quite a bit, but we'll get into this one a little bit more later once we actually start getting into like animating things. Keys. It's a lot of the same options that you would get from right-clicking in the UI. There's insert key, add key, and then I'll go over the benefits and the differences between a key and a breakdown. Breakdowns can actually be really, really useful if you know how to use them. Let's see. And in-betweens. Like I said, let me go over I'm going to go over the rest of the menu first, and then I will cover the difference between a key, a breakdown, and in-between. So going into tangents, there are a lot of different types of tangents, and actually first I'll explain the concept of a tangent. So like I was saying before, that I'm going to set another key here, just for example's sake, and I'm going to isolate this curve. Just so we're talking about, actually, you know what? Let's use this one. Translate y. Translate y is this ball's value for going up and down. Up and down, up and down, right? And it goes up here on frame 4. Alrighty, so you'll notice that if I have a key selected, you see these little handles here on the left and the right. If you guys have used Photoshop or Illustrator, you know, these handles, these tangents, they're very similar to those. I can select these tangents one by one, and I can middle mouse move them. And so the relationship between the frame that I have on, the key that I have on frame 1, the key that I have on frame 4 will differ a little bit. So at the moment, right, this value right here is a little bit more closer to 1. My value at 3 is a little bit more closer to 4. And of course, I have my value at 4. But let's say that I want the ball to go a little bit further under and then up. So I can do that by either creating a keyframe, although it's kind of bad practice to put keyframes one after another. You know, you can do, you know, you can let the computer do a lot of heavy lifting for you. So I'll just delete that. What I'll do instead is I'll get what I want just by manipulating these tangent handles. So I'll select this and move this down, and I'll select this one and move it down. That way, you'll see now that the ball will go under and then up. And you know what? I'll actually do this over a greater number of frames. That way it's a little bit easier to see. So let's say from this spot to this spot, you can see that right here, it's beginning to go down, but then as it comes here, it starts to level off. And so I want this curve to be like that. That way it'll go in a complete under arc. And I know this may be a little bit discombobulating to look at only because I'm scrubbing left and right, but the ball is going right to left. And it's important to remember that the channel that I'm affecting is translate Y, meaning the up and down only. If I were affecting the way that it's going left and right, then I would have to be on my Z channel, my translate Z. And so let's say that I want it to stay, I don't want it to move towards the left as quick as it does. So I can leave this tangent handle as it is pretty much, and then I can just move this tangent handle down. That way it'll stay closer that way and then shoot over to the left. Okay, so when working with tangents, you know, you don't have to go through and affect each one by one. There are a couple of types of tangents that Maya has that are preset that will get you pretty close to what you want, or that'll just make your job maybe a little bit easier. And so I'm going to put these back to normal tangents. So if I select the curve here, and right here, A is for auto tangent. There you go. Auto tangent just means that Maya will automatically, hence the name auto tangent, Maya will automatically calculate the best way for those keys to relate to one another. And there's a lot of different options as to how you can choose to get the keys to relate to each other. This one is spline. This one will give you a little bit of extra, or it'll give you a little bit of overshoot. And you'll, I'm sure as you go all along your journey, you'll begin to find out what overshoot means. But in this instance, it just means that, let's go back to auto. It just means that it'll try and get to, let's say this is our point A and point B. It'll try and get to point B a little bit before it should and go past it. So you'll see that it's going to, you know, favor itself towards point B a little bit more. Let's see. The next tangent is a clamp tangent. I'm not going to go over this one only because you don't really find yourself, or I don't find myself using this one much. I more so find myself using an auto tangent or a spline tangent. These ones are linear tangents. It'll go directly from A to B. These tangents are flat tangents, meaning that it'll make the tangents flat. Let's say if in the middle, we have a tangent that's, a direct in between, or a direct, the direct middle point of point A to point B. If I select this to flat, it'll give me a flat tangent like that. Another one of the tangents that I find myself using a lot, it depends on your workflow, but a step tangent. So it'll hold its position. Let me select all the tangents actually. It'll select its position, or it'll stay in its position until it gets the next key. See? Cool. And so now I want to kind of go over a little bit about the tangent handles themselves. So let's use the translate. Oops, I'm sorry, not the expression editor, the connection editor, but let's go over these ones themselves. So, oh, I'm sorry. Before that, I completely forgot to describe the difference between a key, a breakdown, and an in-between. Okay, so where is that key? Okay, so a keyframe in animation is probably what most people refer to as like a golden pose, a main storytelling pose. It's your key pose, and a breakdown are keys that you would put in between keyframes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you would put them, if 1 and 10 were our keyframes, and actually, you know what? To further demonstrate, let's just go ahead and delete this animation. Select these keyframes, I'm going to hit delete, and then I'm going to set another key here, and then I'm just going to simply move it up. That way I have a point A and point B, and it's really clear. So let's say that 1 and 10 are my keyframes. A breakdown key doesn't necessarily mean that it's all the frames in between 1 to 10, more so frames that kind of influence the way it gets from A to B. And you don't have to put them in every single frame. Let's say that we want to move, we want this ball to spend a lot of time at the bottom and then shoot up really quickly. So maybe halfway, instead of being this far up in its trajectory, we want it still to be somewhere down here. So by doing that, you can see how much I've affected my translate Y curve. Sorry, Control Z back there. And so this would be considered my breakdown. And all of these in between, and actually, let's say like I don't want the ball to start moving a lot until maybe after frame 3. So I'll set a key here, zoom in a little bit, and then I'll pull this down just a bit, and I'll set this to auto tangent. There we go. So now my keyframes would be 1 and 10. Whoops, can't even see the ball anymore. My keyframes would be 1 and 10. My breakdowns would be 3 and 6. And all the keys in between the keys that I've set, meaning in between 1 and 3, in between 3 and 6, and in between 6 and 10, all of these keys without a red tick are my in-betweens. They're literally in between. Sorry. But yeah, those are the concepts behind those. And so when you convert them to different kinds of keys here, they give them some different properties. So actually, I'm going to get to how I would use breakdown keys a little bit later when we get into a little bit more advanced lessons. For now, I just want to get you guys familiar with the graph editor, what everything is, how everything works. And along those lines, actually, now I'm going to go over tangent handles. So some people do this, some people don't. It really depends on preference, and it really depends on where you're working. Some places are okay with this happening, some places maybe not so much. But I know plenty of animators that do this, and and they're great, and they get the job done, and it's totally cool. Me personally, I don't, but in case it's something that you would like to do, what you can actually do with these tangent handles is you can separate them so they act independently of one another. So if we go to our tangents drop down right here, there is an in tangent and an out tangent. The in tangent would be this one. We are going into this tangent. And our out tangent would be this one. We are going out from this tangent. And so you'll notice that the options are actually this exact same as the types of tangents there are right here. And so what you can also do is right here below that is if you break the tangents, you guessed it, ta-da, this moves on its own and this moves on its own. But let's say, you know, you do this on accident or it's not something you like, you can just select the key again and you hit unify tangent and it's back to normal. But along those lines, what a lot of people also like to do is they like to use tangent weight. And so like I was saying earlier, if you use Photoshop or if you use Illustrator, these tangents work a lot similar to the way you'd be tracing a path or a vector or something like that. So if we go into tangents and we free tangent weight, or I'm sorry, we free the tangent length. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I have to break it first. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I have to unlock it first. Curves. There it is. Okay. Free tangent weight. There we go. Okay. So what you can do, actually, let's unify this again. Okay. So what some people like to do is actually, let me do this from scratch. Select this tangent here and they go to curves. And they go down all the way to the bottom to weighted tangents. And this will allow you to scale the tangents as such. That way, there's a couple of ways to achieve what we've achieved right here, right? Let's say instead of using these, I want to rebuild that with just these two keys. So I can set both of these to flat, right? That's a start. And then I can definitely set this to angle down a little bit. But then if I use my weighted tangents and I shift drag this out, if I shift drag just like in Photoshop or anything, it'll stay along the same coordinate that I'm dragging, right? So if I shift middle drag to the right, it'll stay along those lines and it won't try and move it up or anything like that. So I can get the same curve with those same two keys, and I don't need any breakdown keys. I just have those two, and it'll get me the same result. Or you can do what I did before. I'm just going to Control Z all the way back, and you can use keyframes, and that's totally fine. Again, it's up to a matter of preference. So with that, we are going to stop the lesson here. We're going to pick up again next week, and we'll start to get into rotation order. We are going to start to get into some the levels of production, and we'll start to get into customizing with like shelves, custom scripts, and hotkeys and stuff like that. And I'm going to allow everyone to unmute themselves now. Thank you all for being so patient. Cool. Hello, hello. Thank you guys for being so patient during that. I try and keep that block of lecture intact, for future uses. But yeah, I'm sure this is all stuff that you guys have pretty much know by now. We'll start to get into the really juicy stuff later on with all the Animbot stuff and all the advanced tools. Are there any questions that you guys had by any chance?
Yes, if I may.
Sure.
Hi.
Hey.
I have a couple of questions. You mentioned the hull before when you selected the curve to the hull to magnify
Oh, yes.
the size of the
hull, yeah.
The hull.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of transformation is something that we have to do on the rig file, since I usually work, but I guess all of us, we work with references file.
Mm-hmm.
So can we do it in reference?
You can.
That kind of transformation, and
You can do it in the reference, or you can do it in the scene. And if you're allowed to make reference edits in your scene, it will remember that. The only danger in doing it in the reference file is that if you're in a production and you're
yes,
using that shared rig, you know, it'll happen for everybody, and you know
yeah,
they may not want that. So
yeah.
that's just something to be aware of. But you totally can. You totally can.
Okay, okay. Just and then you mentioned Xform. Xform.
I mentioned Xform.
Xform. Yeah. I don't really know what that is.
I
What?
did not go over Xform yet. I will be going over Xform later, though.
Okay, because I know they're in Animbot as well, but
Yes,
I. Okay, so that.
Xform is really, really useful, and I'm going to be going over the Xform Animbot tools properly and in depth
Okay, okay, just
after
because
week
you
5.
mentioned before. Okay,
Yeah,
okay, just
yeah.
because you mentioned it. Okay, and okay, one thing that I saw in the last time I wasn't live with
Hmm.
the lecture, but I saw the recording,
Hmm.
and I saw, probably you know that, but just to um, I don't know, to say it, and you said that sometimes you have to deselect the manipulators because sometimes they get in the way when you want to select more than one thing.
Hmm.
But there is an option in the preferences,
Hmm.
which is really, really cool. And if you go in the walking away guide, the orange one, the preferences window,
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
you can find it in the on the left. There is uh, manipulators. It's like there, and you see there is manipulator visibility.
Hmm.
And if you check those three, automatically when you push the shift, the control, the alt, the
Hmm.
manipulators will go away and they will go back.
Hmm.
So it might be something that I don't know. Maybe you know it.
Yeah, for sure. These are actually really handy. The problem that I run into is that when I'm working, I have a lot of shortcuts bound to Control and Shift and those combinations. So
Okay.
when I'm doing my shortcuts, I don't want my, you know, I don't want those to quite disappear, or I don't want them to override anything. So
Okay.
my solution to that is just basically just using this. But when I'm working,
Yeah.
actually, and when I'm animating, I don't really select anything in the scene. Most of the time, the only thing that I see is the model. I don't see any controls, and I just use my selection sets.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, that's a great point, and that's a great tip. Thank you.
Okay. And you don't have curves, so in your viewport, and
Correct.
even when you have to, to select like little controllers, like for the fingers,
Hmm.
you have selections set for fingers as well, for
For everything,
single
yeah.
finger. Okay.
Hmm.
And
Most of the time I do. If there's something that I absolutely need, I have a shortcut to toggle the controllers on and off.
yeah, that I do. Okay. Uh, Nothing more. I just have those three questions.
Okay, well, great. Thanks for the questions, and thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Cool. Did you guys have any other questions that I might be able to answer for you?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure, sure.
I was wondering what difference between alignment
Hmm.
and math transformation.
Alignment and match transformations. So what alignment does is it will actually align based off of the location in world space. The match translations will actually match the values that you have here. So like I was saying earlier, if they're in different spaces, they can match the values, but it won't necessarily mean that they'll match the same space. So let's say, for example, hang on, let me see if I can mock this up real quick. So let's say if I have a 1 and a 1, or let's say, let's make this a little bit more drastic. Let's 6 and 6. If I have these 6 and 6, right? If I use match transformations, what that would do is it would take this 6 and 6 and put it here, 6 and 6. But you can see that these are still offset. When I align them using the align tool, or let's say align objects, right? This is the one that we were going over. If I use them using the align tool, you can see that this sphere has a 6 and 6, but the one that I used to align it has different coordinates. And so they match in the same space, but they don't have the same transformations.
Okay, same transformation.
Yeah.
Okay, another question.
Sure.
Like a joint, is it possible for a joint to have like a 0 value? When it is not, like if you want to put a joint in 0 without putting a group.
A joint?
Without having a joint.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it definitely is. So when you go through and create joints, oh, my shelves here. Oh, what happened? Did Maya not like what I was doing? Uh-oh. Okay, I'm back. Sweet. Okay, cool. So this is my, you know what? I'll do it properly. So let's go to, man, I don't even know where create joints is anymore. I just have my joint shortcut. Okay, so when I create my joints, I normally do it from the top or some kind of orthographic view, and then I'll snap to point. So let's say, no, let's snap to grid. So let's say I want to create a joint like that. And yeah, so most of the time when you run into a joint like this, its 0 value will be when it's created. And so if it's translated, or if there's values in here, that means it's already been manipulated. And if you can't zero that out, then chances are it's being controlled by something else. So the other example, what I think you mean is that, let's say you're making a character and you want this joint to align with his arm, right? And you want it to align like that, but you want this to be the 0 pose. Is that what you mean?
No, usually I mean on the translate.
Oh, on the translates. Okay, that's fine too.
Yeah, when you put a character like this, or on the mouth, like maybe there are too many joints.
Yeah, sure. So
and they are in a group to make, when you put in the group, they have to be 0. Like you put in the 0. But is it possible, like the joint itself, can it be put on the 0 without making in a group?
Yes.
Without putting the group for translate.
Yeah. So okay. So you're talking about right here, right? Let's say, for example, that it's moved into position here, and you want to 0 out these translates.
Yeah.
In position.
Yeah, in position.
Yeah. So if you modify and freeze transformations right here, I'm going to go to the option box only because there's different, or there's a special circumstances for a joint. You can freeze the transformations, and it should work for joints. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's rotations. I'm sorry. Okay. Only there is no shape for the joint. I don't know off the top of my head. I can find out for you, but I think I'd be more interested in what you need it for. Is there a reason why you need them at 0?
No, it's just to simplify, because when you like do a rigging, there are many groups like that. Sometimes many groups. Sometimes you want to simplify it without having to put in groups and control of the groups, something like that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if there's a way around not having a rig be very complicated. I do quite a bit of rigging myself, yeah. I feel like the more you're talking about having a really complicated tree, right?
Yeah, hierarchy, the group control, you have to put another
Yeah.
group. Usually more on the fingers like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you can get around having a rig without a complicated tree. The complicated tree is actually something that's actually really important for ease of use for the animator. So if it's really something that you want to find out about, I can do some research and find out for you, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Actually, that was next.
Okay. Did you guys have any other questions? No? Cool. Okay. Thanks for sticking around.